Welcome to episode 67 of the Liz McMullen Show. I am inviting a wonderful author, Jan Redmann. She's going to be my guest, and she's won tons of awards, too many for me to remember, but just know she's awesome. So thank you for coming on the show, Jean.
Hi, you're welcome. And I'm disappointed. I'd hoped I'd been episode 69 instead of 67, but you know.
Nuts!
But probably everyone wants to be episode 69, so I'll leave it for somebody else.
Oh, Lord. I think I actually had either an erotica or a romance author who got 69 as her episode.
That works.
So, I have to ask the question just in case I missed something. Are all your books Micky Knight books?
All the published ones, yes,
okay.
They are.
Okay, I wanted to be sure about that. I was like, I think so. I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2 in my my ebook format.
Yeah, there should be 8 altogether, and then I've co-edited some anthologies with Greg Heron.
Yeah. So we have this character, Micky Knight, and she is a PI, and she's so incredibly flawed in a good way, in a bad way. She has a hard life, and my one feeling is the Shoal of Time, which is the most recent novel that you've done, it gives me this feeling like, unfortunately, Micky has come full circle.
Oh, and she kind of has, because when I started writing Micky Knight, I really wanted to write a lesbian detective. That there was really this huge sea change going on in the world of mysteries and detective fiction. That Marsha Muller, Sarah Paretsky, Sue Grafton suddenly took over this iconic male PI, and said, no, we can do it too. The women can do it. And so I felt like, okay, so if the straight women can do it, why can't the lesbians do it? And I wanted to read those books, but there really weren't that many out there. There's some cozy. There were Catherine Forrester, the police procedural, but there weren't that many private detectives. So I said, oh, well, I'll just start fooling around with it. And so I really kind of wanted to make her into that walks the mean streets, is dealing with, her own demons. And for me, one of the things is, mysteries are about justice. And finding the truth. And it's how do those flawed, imperfect people who may be struggling with their own challenges, how do they search for justice? And that's kind of the question that's always driven me with Micky, is how does she, even though she's got this really sometimes messed up life, sometimes she does okay, but how does she keep going on and saying, I need to find out, who's been hurt, and how can is there anything I can do that will bring justice or some sense of it back to these people?
Yeah, there's only one other character that I've ever read that gives me that same feel. I'm so flawed. I'm so imperfect. What can I do? Or am I redeemable? And the character is Brett Higgins from Teresa Zmansky's series. It's like I think they're in Detroit, and the character is she's an organized crime leader.
Mm-hmm.
She has a pornography theater house.
Yeah.
And sells, sex toys at different places, and has a lot of really shady things going on. And she does a lot of shady things and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But she solves these mysteries. She gets involved, but she never feels. It's almost like no matter what she does, she never sees that it's possible that she's a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And the people around her see that she is, and that she has redeemable qualities, but she keeps on, this is a vulgar phrase, but she keeps on stepping on her own dick.
Yeah. Okay.
Which means she keeps on fucking up the good thing in her life. She has a wonderful girlfriend, but she can't keep it in her pants.
Yeah.
And, there's always a good reason, and there's always, something about it, and you kind of understand it, but you're like, oh, God, you did it again? And with Micky, it's like, she's not a bad person. And what's
No, she's not a bad person.
no, and one of the things that in the Shoal of Time, she's talking to a prostitute, and she said, like, there are bad decisions and worse decisions, and
Yeah.
I'd say that kind of applies to Mickey pretty much.
Yeah, well, some of what interests me is life doesn't always give us good choices, and that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of look at, and I have looked at in other books, but particularly this one is that these are people struggling with life didn't give them good choices. I don't think Mickey had some really good choices along the way, and the people he's working with, I can know the scene you're talking about, and that's someone who just doesn't have good choices. And so, what do you do when you're in a situation where you have all you've got are bad choices, and how do you deal with those? And to me, that's always kind of an interesting thing.
Because, a lot of times the scenarios that I could read in a book or whatever, you're like, what the fuck do you do now? And
Yeah.
if you're used to living your life within the lines, coloring within the lines,
Mm-hmm.
you can be at a loss. But, Mickey's so used to the imperfect, and the one thing that she has is she does not give up.
Yeah. Well, and I like to think she's smart. At least I try to write her as being smart. I probably can't write her as any smarter than I am, which could be a limitation. But but that she can think her way through, and she has perspective, even when she's, screaming at fate or yelling or whatever. That she can kind of pull it back and look at what her options are and try and come up with something that's going to work.
I like her older now too, because she seems not that she just reads people and can sense, oh, that's a private eye in the room or whatever.
Yeah.
It's that she distills people down to their game very early. It could be from how they look, or how they physically present themselves, but she has their number fairly early, and that has to do with she's very intelligent. She can see it, and she's got the experience behind her. Like, oh, so we're gonna play this game, huh?
Yeah. Well, I try and make her realistic. And to me is that there are a lot of verbal and nonverbal clues that we can take about people. And I want her to be good at reading them. I don't particularly like and then I had to know, when essentially a character is reading someone else's mind. I'm thinking, how do you know that? You're making assumptions, and sometimes assumptions can be very deadly. But I want Mickey to, when she notices something, she has a concrete reason for it. These people were, I know you're from not down here. Well, how do you know that? Because of the style jacket you're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, oh, okay, that's an observable fact. If someone who lives in New Orleans understands that, we don't wear the same kind of clothes that you do up in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't need the same kind of clothes. And as a matter of fact, we cannot buy the same kind of clothes. They don't sell them down here. So, a slightly heavier jacket that someone's wearing gives the indication that, nope, you're not from down here. I would never be able to buy that jacket down here, so you couldn't have gotten it down here. You got it someplace else. So again, and that's kind of a minor thing, but I want her to be, smart enough to, because that's, as she says in the book, this is her business. It's being a private eye. It's being hired to look for things and find them. Mm. And so she's been sort of trained and honed to pay attention to that.
Well, the other thing about the weather, because this Jersey girl went to New Orleans in February.
Yeah.
And early February, because my partner's birthday is on the 12th, and Valentine's is on the 14th, so we tend to do vacation scents anyway. So we had packed, we had these thermal shirts that I wear to sleep. No, that I wear to sleep, right? Not to wear outside, not because we didn't bring shit with us, but it was a good thing that we brought them, because these thermal shirts were the kind that are really, really thin, and they're designed to, so it was a good thing because it was fucking cold.
Well, yes, it does get cold, and that's what if sometimes people don't realize that, they think, well, in New Orleans it's 45 degrees. How cold is that? It's like, no, it's cold with 90% humidity,
That's
45
it.
degrees, and that's a whole different cold that people often are not
Yes.
ready for.
That's what
But
I'm talking about.
February is actually not a bad time to come here. It depends. Sometimes it can be when it gets to that 42 and rainy. It's as miserable here as anywhere else. But then it will be 75 and sunny.
What was interesting, because I've done different climate as, and I went to college in Western Mass that gets a good amount of snow, and
Yeah.
then I spent the year. I went to Trinity in Dublin for a year, and I was fucking cold because
Mm-hmm.
Ireland or England, lots of rain, very damp,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
doesn't get cold enough to snow. But I can't wear a wool sweater at Mount Holyoke when I was in college because it's just too fucking hot. Like, we have the
Yeah.
snow, but it's too hot. But in Ireland, yes, you
Mm-hmm.
need that wool sweater against that damp cold. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually have a merino wool that I got in Australia that I wear, I think maybe once a year here down here,
Hmm.
because there's about once a year that it gets that, again, that kind of chilly, really, a high of 42 and rainy, kind of miserable, and that's can be winter weather. Usually for us, though, probably from about the end of February to right around now, and in the fall from probably end of September till probably mid to late November. Well, that's what we call our smug season,
Hmm.
because I my partner is tenured elsewhere, so she is actually lives most of the time in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so of course I hear copious detail what the Wisconsin weather is like, and
Hmm.
it's been pretty brutal this winter, and it's gotten to the point that I cannot tell her what our temperature is like here because it's just too cruel. And that's why we call it spunk season, because it's like, oh my God, I had to, shovel through another 6 inches of snow. It's like, I had to think about whether or not I really need to wear a jacket today.
Aw.
Yeah.
So, I think there are two main characters in your books. There's Mickey, and then
Yeah.
there's New Orleans.
Yeah, and I really want to get a sense of New Orleans because it is, as Redmann said, it's one of the great story cities. The three story cities: New Orleans, New York, and San Francisco. And if you write about New Orleans, I think any place you can write about, you should feel a sense of a place. And when I read a book and I don't get a sense of place, I'm always a little bit disappointed. But this should be about New Orleans because it really affects, what Mickey can do. Where does she live in the neighborhood? It tells you so much about who she is, what parts of town she hangs out in. And I think, too, that even before Katrina, this is a city that many Americans are not familiar with. It's the least American of American cities, I think. And, it's something that we need here. We need in this country. Even though I live here, I also think that because the history in New Orleans is a history that few other American cities have. And I don't mean it in terms of just the years, but in what's still left on the ground. The French Quarter is the largest historically intact area in this country.
If my history, if I'm remembering properly, New Orleans was not burned.
No, no, and it's one of the interesting things because for my day job, I've had to go to Atlanta a whole lot. And believe me, if you knew nothing about the cities, you would just plop down in New Orleans and plop down in Atlanta, except that one of these was burned 150 years ago, you would know immediately. Just because of the history and the architecture. And in some ways I kind of live it every single day, as a lot of us here do, that the house I live in is in the area called Treme. And yes, I did move here before they put the show on HBO. But I live in a house that was probably built in 1870. And so it's just that living history that's part of my life, that how many other people have lived in this house, the history that's here, the just the that when over during Mardi Gras, this was one of the obnoxious things I did because it was in February, and I was walking to walking through the French Quarter because we do some work in the French Quarter, and so I was going to meet, some of my staff there. And it was a beautiful day, so I took pictures. But it's, I'm walking in this historic house and this beautiful stuff, and it's just you can take walks along the way in this interesting architecture, block after block after block of houses that were built in the 1840s and the 1850s and the 1890s, or a few of them in the 1700s. Because even though the French Quarter, New Orleans, was not burned in the Civil War, there had been fires there because obviously back in the old days. So there were some of the original buildings had been burned, but many of them were still rebuilt. So you can go back, centuries, literally, just by walking a block or two. And even though I'm not in the French Quarter, I live outside of it, I still live in a historic district. And there's a historic district downtown of it. So it's, in many cities, you can go to like a block or two, and then it's more modern stuff. In New Orleans, many of the neighborhoods are still very much intact from where they were, a century, even 150 years ago.
You're very lucky in that, and I have to admit, like when I visit towns, I love going to visit historical homes and do home tours and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
And I guess it was my blonde moment. 2 years ago, I was visiting my friend. She was in Atlanta, and I was looking for some touristy things for us to do. And I was like, "Why on earth is it so hard to find, a historical tour here? What's going on?" And then, we're having brunch.
The burning of Atlanta.
Oh my God, we're having lunch, and she. It's worse for her because she grew up partially in Texas and also partially in Louisiana.
Yeah.
And so she's got less of an excuse than I do. Shreveport. And she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot that in the burning of Atlanta." And the other town I think that's, really still has that richness is Savannah.
Yeah. I have not been there, although I've heard that. It would be interesting, someday to get there just to compare the two.
Because, my partner and I have visited, we used to go to Florida, and it was one of the places that we would stop to when we were driving.
Uh-huh.
And there are certain towns that have that, and Savannah and New Orleans are both, because also they did not burn Savannah either,
Yes.
It was a devil's bargain not to get it burnt. But still, it was not burned, and so those are two towns. If you're really looking for rich history in the United States, that's where you need to go.
Yeah,
and
that's one of the things is it's so interesting to write about because there really is all those different layers here, mysteries upon mysteries upon mysteries.
Plus, there's something about the climate, and even though there are all these beautiful houses, there's like a darkness, even in the Garden District. There's something very romantic, decadent. And I just spent an epic time finishing The Witching Hour about last week, and I had no idea how long it was going to take me. But the reason why I really enjoyed it was there was such a sense of place, and the Michael character, after living in San Francisco for so long with the cold, he was just, in heaven with the humidity and the flowers and, the old houses, things that reminded him when he was young, and, that sense of place. For those of you who are listening, if you really want a good sense of place, and including, I guess, the people who had a hard living growing up like Micky, and those who did not. There's some characters that are more well off than others, and so you get to see the different flavors of society.
Yeah, well, and I think that's why there's that sort of darkness to New Orleans. I think again when you have that history, and if you look at the history of this town, it was one of the last places to be hit with the yellow fever epidemic in the United States in 1906. I know that because I had to do some research on it for one of the books, and so we have the cities of the dead, And again, that when you see the tombs, the water table here, because it's so close to the river and the lake on the other side, the water table here is too high to actually bury people in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how the famous cemeteries came out, that they're mausoleums on top. So you can literally, actually, you're driving down the interstate and you're coming to the French Quarter, you can look over and you suddenly see this huge graveyard. That's a historic graveyard.
Wasn't it true that, like, when the weather, before they had these types of graveyards, that when the weather was bad, the bodies that had been buried would exhume themselves?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that happened, I know, certainly in Hurricane Camille. One of the challenges they had with getting an accurate body count was the number of cemeteries that had been washed out and added extra bodies to, I don't think it was quite so bad in Katrina. They maybe have, better ways, forensic ways of looking at those things. But I know that in Camille, which was 1969, and it hit more of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, that they did have some challenges because the graves were washed out. They were so shallow.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's certainly in the flooding, and that's why they figured out pretty quickly on that, burying bodies underground was just not going to be an effective way to get rid of them here. And again, of course, it may lead to some of that voodoo tradition and some of the spookiness is what happens to a place where you bury people and they don't stay buried?
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect your tradition?
Or the way that the mausoleums are, where they bury people in a slot, and then once it's deteriorated, they push the bones back.
Right. Well, if the space is at a premium, so particularly when you have a cholera epidemic and then a yellow fever epidemic and that sort of stuff, you gotta do something with the dead bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It can
be
a
city with a very rich history.
Yes, it is, and one of the things that's kind of been thrilling for me are the times when I've seen places, I've been someplace that's in the book, like. I think it was in The Witching Hour, where they were coming out from the funeral, and then Commander Palace is on the other side, but they didn't call it Commander's Palace. They just described what it looked like on the outside. I was like, I had dinner there.
Yes, and probably a very good dinner.
Oh, it was so nice. And I know you're close with Ali Valley, and I contacted you and her when I was going to go on a trip, and she gave me this outstanding list of restaurants to go to. And she not only gave me like the names and addresses, she gave me sometimes a little history behind it, and also what types of things that you want to try and eat, like turtle soup or something like that.
Right.
But that was one of the places that we went to, and so my partner and I were very dressed up, and I was wearing this dress that. I didn't realize that wasn't thinking about the fact that it's open in the back and the front, but it's, it's very modest. But I'm sitting there and I'm feeling all prim and proper, and I had my hair back and I makeup and looked like a girl. And, I like to do that for my partner who likes to, just like a handsome man. And so the waitress came up, one of the waitresses came up, she's like, "Oh, I love your tattoo." And I was like, "Oh, crap." I have this huge tattoo on my back. It's really obvious, especially when I was in my wedding dress, but I wasn't thinking about it. I was just like, here I'm trying to look like a classy girl with like jewelry and a nice outfit and all this. And she's like, "I like your tattoo." I was like, "Oh, shit."
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing, and I think that's the real different thing, is that it's, even Commander's Palace, which is probably one of the best restaurants, not only in the city, but in the country, is you don't get a snooty attitude.
Mm-mm.
I have my partner and I and two friends of ours, two male friends actually, we have a tradition now that we go every New Year's Eve day for lunch. Because we were just like, at some point, I think we're like, well, we've never been to Commander's, and like, we live in New Orleans, we need to do this. So we started going there, and it's always friendly and welcoming. We're not there, other than this once a year tradition, we're not the regulars.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone's like, hey, come on this way. Sure, take a look at the kitchen, do this.
Yes, they took us to the kitchen because
they took us to the kitchen.
Yeah.
And if you read about the Brennan family, the founders of, and particularly Ella Brennan, who did, she's very liberal, which makes you feel good about spending your money there. But that was the whole point. that was what they wanted to do with the restaurant. Was just, it's supposed to be, you're supposed to have a good time and feel welcome, and there's, other than, we want to have really good food, and that's what I think has made it, and a lot of the restaurant tradition in New Orleans, so successful. It's really about having a good time in the food, and not about who you can impress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. I liked it a lot. I like the attitude. And it's also that, people are so nice.
Yeah,
It's,
that's right.
and I say that the way I do is because I'm so used to New York City, and yes, there are nice people there, and there are places that are
Yes.
equally welcoming as Commander's
Hmm.
Palace, but there's nothing like Southern kindness. It's almost like it's
Yeah.
almost like, a delicacy in and of itself.
Hmm.
For us to
Yeah.
experience us Yanks.
Yeah.
So I have some questions from the studio audience.
Okay.
Some
Right.
questions from the studio audience. Um, so one of them is, and it kind of touched on something that we've already seen, and she actually wrote a paragraph, so I'm going to have to read it in order for it to make sense. Well, it makes
Okay.
sense in and of itself. Her name is Paula Green, and her question is, why is Redmann so hard on Micky? First, she had to endure her monstrous abusive family her mother kept from her, and then, from the first book, her so-called friends have, every time they speak to her, reminds her of her imperfections and transgressions, which Micky just seems to accept as her due. Then Cordelia cheats on her, and when Micky has an issue with that, those same friends are ragging Micky, saying that, what's the problem? She made a mistake, get over it, with the expectation of forgiveness that Micky never got for the transgressions we never see. The only one of the books where people in a book that really cares about her is Torben, and I like the mysteries, but I really want to see Micky stand up and tell her friends and Cordelia to take a hike and to get people around her who treat her right. I always feel so bad for her.
Hmm. Okay.
I know that was a
Yeah.
mouthful, but I thought it was interesting is that um, Micky has a lower opinion of herself than, at least me as a reader has of her.
Hmm.
And even though, like you explained, before the in the beginning of the Shoal of Time, or at different points, why they ended up breaking up, I was like, it's not really. I was like, she wasn't that much of an asshole. I think that, she's an easy target for some folks.
Hmm. It's a lot of this is it's spread over 8 books,
Mm-hmm.
and time does pass, um, and I just didn't. I feel that sometimes her friends do rag on her, but I think she rags on them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel that underlying that, some of that ragging and teasing, there's a genuine affection and respect. I mean, I don't think they would have been friends with her if they really, didn't like her. And I don't think Micky would have tolerated it if she felt she was just being, she was with people that didn't care for her. Um, that said, it's I'm writing in the PI genre, in the mystery genre, and in the noir, the sort of the darker, the detective who walks the mean streets and deals with a lot of crap. And one of the questions when I started writing the books was, okay, what kind of person, and now even more importantly, what kind of woman would do this? And the answer came is, it's probably not someone who came from, a nice, fairly well-to-do, comfortable middle class environment. Someone who can make it in the system. It has to be someone who the system wasn't necessarily kind to. She can manage going through it. She did manage to get to college. She got out of the abusive family, but it's someone who needs to be a little bit of that outsider, the proverbial outsider. That's sort of the standard for the genre. And so, how does someone become that person? And as I explored, then one of the questions that I came up with is that she came from an abusive family and being sexually abused, and there was an initial impulse on my spot to say, well, no, it didn't really happen to her. He tried it, and she was able to beat him off. And then I realized, no, that's the myth. That if you're really smart and you're really good and you're really the hero, it doesn't happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to write that. She's the hero of this book. She's smart. She's tough. And it still happened to her, and she has to learn how to survive it. And so as I made those decisions along the way with the character, it sort of became, is how does this person that I'm in the process of creating deal with this life? And, and the also the thing is, let's be real, I'm writing books that I want people to actually read. And if it's all nicey domestic in the kitchen doing dishes and that's not really interesting to sit and read. Yes, it's nice to come home and do. But in terms of, okay, how do I write books that are about this person who's a private detective, solving the dilemma in front of her, making that search for justice, trying to find some way to protect those who are being hurt, and, what she does is she fights against the abuse of power. That's probably one of the big things she does. And so how does this person do that? And it has to be sometimes she is alienated from societies, that she walks away from things. And so that's a lot of what goes into it. So I don't know how to answer that other than if... I do write mysteries, and if you're interested more in it because of the romance or that, then I'm probably not the best author for you.
Well, I think also, like, one of the things that you have a good measure of that, balances out all the NOLA Noir, say that 5 times fast, is the humor. And I have some quotes written down, and one of them tickled me, and this is Joanne talking to Mickey when she's, the person who's supposed to be coming and get her is free, and this is an ill will. You know the drill. Pay attention to your surroundings, vary your routes, look for suspicious activity, make sure your doors are locked, alarm set. Don't take candy from strangers, avoid 80s rock music, and pork rinds are not a food.
Yes. Yes. Well, yes.
I love the last two. Avoid 80s rock music and pork rinds are not a food.
Well, and again, that's, I think I can be a fairly witty person. I've been told I have, and that's part. It's some of it's what it is, and you have to have that kind of humor to relieve it, and you have to have that kind of humor to kind of break things up. And it's kind of finding that balance. And it's also some of Mickey's kind of quirky, the way her brain works, the way her friends work. I remember, I think it was Lost Daughter. She's about to go into, she's supposed to meet somebody, and the person doesn't seem to be there, and the door's open. It's suspicious, and she's thinking, well, maybe she's in the bathroom, and then she starts going off and having what happens if New Orleans went onto a high fiber diet and everyone started having to shit all the time, and would it break the toilet system? It's just the way her quirky mind works. It has to be incorporated into the books because, like you say, otherwise it gets pretty dark and dreary.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is kind of thrilling, and an actual dovetail into a question from our listening audience. But before I get there, I have another quote, and the reason why I kept it was because when we started out with Micky Knight, there were no cell phones, and
yes.
And if you have a character that goes through a few decades, there are things that change and things that stay the same. So she has a cell phone, but she has a contentious relationship to a certain degree. She pretty much just used it as a phone. Right. So this is a quote, like she's waiting to speak to somebody, Lydia. And she said, I got there right about 7, but I didn't see Lydia. I parked on the far side of the lot, got out, and then stood out by my car fiddling with my cell phone. I had run through about every function except the ones I didn't know what they would do and had never tried because I was afraid they might cause the phone to go into the fetal position. And I was just like, oh my God, don't touch that button. It will self-destruct,
Yeah. Well, the technology certainly does place the books in a certain amount of time. And yes, as the first books, the first Micky Knight book came out in 1990. So time has passed, and and of course I had to update her with technology. I particularly before Katrina, the books were set in sort of a vague now, so
Mm-hmm.
I was just working with what contemporaneously what was going on in my life. Did people have cell phones? I think in the fourth book, Lost Daughter, she actually has a car phone, or somebody has a car phone. You remember those huge things that weighed like
Yes,
40
the huge
pounds?
honking ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of cringe at it now, but that's what was available then. Of course, now we all have cell phones that could probably launch us to the moon if we wanted to do that. Um, so I've had to kind of move her along with where she was, and a lot of it is where am I with my technology? And I think I'm not the most forward person, but I'm not a Luddite either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when would you reasonably have a smartphone? And of course, then the minute you give your detective a smartphone, then it becomes okay. Well, how do I work around the fact that she can be in the middle of the graveyard at midnight and still call the police? Back in the old days before cell phones and stuff, then you really had that sort of dramatic situation. She's stuck alone. She's got to still save the orphans and the puppies and all this sort of stuff, and no one's around, and the nearest payphone is 10 blocks away and probably doesn't work. Well, it's like, pull out your cell phone. Um, and so the technology is just, it's part of life, and how does it work into, what she does. I use my cell phone mainly to check the weather,
Mm-hmm.
I think, and to talk to my partner. So it becomes one of those things that okay, how would she as a detective use it? And probably as we go along and things get more technologically complicated, she's going to have to be using more stuff. I mean, she's really started integrating computer searches and what can you do on computers. And, I think at one point she says, a lot of what she does, and most of this is not in the books because it's not that exciting, but a lot of what she does is just sit in front of a computer screen and look things up,
Mm-hmm.
because there are such powerful search engines now.
So our listening audience, Rebecca Gunn asks, Micky is aging as gracefully as most of us. Are you planning to carry her into senior status?
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by senior status. I will say that Micky's aging isn't as rigorously tied to years as mine is. So she can just sit on the shelf for 3 years, and I have a birthday every single year, as do all of us in the real
Ah.
life. So she's at this point, she's probably, I'm thinking 40 something, and I've been not defining that any more than that. And I'm no longer 40 something. So I think that
I feel the vagueness in that. I have noticed where it's like, I can't be the young ingenue anymore, but I can be Pink Debbie, who's been divorced and is trying to make ends meet by, doing door-to-door surveys.
right. Yeah, that she should be, like I say, she should be a woman of a certain age, still youngish, but not young anymore by any means. Probably what kind of on the verge of real middle age. And the thing is too that as Private Eye, she's fairly physically active. We're still running around and shooting at bad guys and that sort of stuff. And how much of that can you do when you're 72? And I don't think so. So we'll see. I don't know. I probably at some point she's gonna retire or go back to sitting in front of the computer screen, which isn't going to be that interesting to write books about. So it becomes, and I've seen this discussion with some of the other authors, is, I remember Sarah Paretsky on a panel saying that, she knows that the dog should be dead by now because the dog's probably 32 years old and dogs don't live that long, but she just couldn't bear to keep, kill the dog off. So the dog's still running around. And a lot of the people in her books, if they aged again in that very precise chronological age that all the rest of us are tied to, then they would be much older. But in fiction, we kind of get to play with it. We can pull it back a little bit, and I certainly acknowledge that I have done that. So is she going to turn into, Miss Marple? Probably not. I can't really see her, jumping over fences when she's, 62 years old.
She'll be like Angela Lansbury, the dyke version.
Yeah. It's like, who would live in Cabot Cove? Every single guest star dies.
Okay, I have a hard news question
Okay.
from Kristen Rue Piper, and she said, "If you were Mickey, what would your favorite food to eat? Excuse me. What would be your favorite food to eat besides a po' boy?"
Well, New Orleans has so many choices. It would be really hard to say, well, this, that, and the other. Shrimp, cooking in them multiple ways. Seafood would certainly be a big one. You can cook shrimp in multiple ways. Crawfish, soft shell crab. Oh, I love soft shell crab. A good red beans and rice. There's just a cornucopia of food
Oh my
here,
God.
literally.
I went to Mother's a few times, and my partner and I, it was so fucking hot because we drove from GCLS in Dallas, and we drove to New Orleans, and it was so hot, and we went in there, and we ordered some food. We had no concept of the portions we were about to receive.
Oh, yeah.
The portions were so epic that we actually brought it with us to, when we drove to New Orleans, and then our next stop was Savannah. So we actually brought it with us to Savannah and put it in the refrigerator there and continued to eat it.
Yeah, Mother's makes some pretty good po' boys. I mean, I can remember going there with my dad. That's how, when I was a teenager, we were driving over here from the Mississippi Gulf Coast to come to New Orleans. So Mother's is one of those iconic places that's been there forever. But yeah, but you have those, and Mother's is a little bit more touristy now, but you have these little hole-in-the-wall po' boy shops, or Parkway Bakery is one of my favorites. President Obama went there. So these little places that are just out of the way that you can just get some really good food. And I think that's really one of the lovely things about New Orleans. It's just such a choice.
So I have a follow-up question from myself.
Okay.
If Mickey had to choose between never having coffee again or never having one of her favorite things like a po' boy, which one do you think she would go for?
That's so hypothetical, because of course it's never going to happen.
Of course not. Of course not.
Mickey would probably take the pragmatic choice and say that she has to have her coffee. Mm-hmm. So she can't give up coffee, because that's a daily wake herself up. So it'd probably be coffee.
Yeah, I one of the things I dug, you have all these great little details. They're not exactly throwaway lines, but there's just all these little things. And she's like, and I didn't offer them coffee because I got the good stuff in my office hidden up, and and I don't want this person to feel very welcome since they've kind of pushed their way into my office, so I'm not offering them any of my coffee.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, good for you.
Well, and to me, that's it. It's that sort of stuff that makes the book interesting. I think people want to read. It's not just the story. I mean, the plot should be interesting and stuff, but it's how does that particular person, and it's some of those little moments where it's like, I don't want you here. I'm not offering you my good coffee. I'll give you the green tea that was left over from some vegan that was here before, but I'm not making you my good coffee. That's the sort of stuff that's like, oh, okay. It brings us back into the world of these are real people doing real things, and they've got an odd, sense of looking at life.
One of the things that was so epic, because I've read all of them, over time, and so she's changed, in the way that she speaks changed, the way she interacts with people changed. Mm-hmm. But when she was spinning a yarn for Emily Harris about why her car was parked in this out of the way gravel place, and she goes into this really epic tale of like, oh, and then I wanted some food, and well, I had to take a piss, and and it was so long and drawn out, and it reminded me of The Big Easy, where I think Ellen Barkin was the actress, where she was getting teased. Yeah. Like going into all these yarns using, colloquialisms and things that are, to exclude the Yankee and whatnot. And I was just, so that tickled me. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Well, storytelling is what we do.
She's great. She's great. I like, and really she has to be a good storyteller, because a lot of times she's playing a role in order to
Yeah.
get information. She's being a faker.
Yeah.
But she's very good at it. And she can also tell what people's game is. And one of the interesting ways that was illustrated in Ill Will was with how she could read Grant. Grant, well, that he's like, he's the big dog, and that's the reason he's not interested in her.
Yeah.
Which, she's like, oh God, hopefully I don't have, to get this information, hopefully I don't have to do anything, or, he doesn't try anything. And then she realizes, like, oh, he's not interested in me. He just wants to be seen as a top wolf. He wants to see Puppy Dog Eyes Vincent walk in on them and think that, something more than just having a little discussion about selling, these herbal supplements. And so it was and she's just like, oh, what a relief.
Yeah.
He's just being a dick. He basically is like pissing contest. Like, I'm showing you I'm the top dog, you young kid. I'm going to show you how it goes and whatnot.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, thank God he doesn't want to sleep with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, you can read those sort of things in people. If you're, I mean, of course, there are people that are stupid and oblivious, but most of the time, if someone really is sexually interested in you, you can kind of feel it. There's a kind of an attention. There's a way they look at you. There are all these things that Micky could reasonably know about him as someone who's very observant and recognizing that, okay, he's just trying to screw with this other guy who's been really friendly and does seem to have a sexual interest in Micky, and he's trying to again step on his dick, as you said earlier. And that's all it's about. So it's not about her; it's about the two of them, and that tells her how to read the situation and how to play it.
Well, also what's interesting is that you get a sense. She even has kind of a sense of what the character she's playing, Pink Debbie, how would that feel to her? And, and if you're like desperate and you don't have money and you're hoping, you're hoping for something like, oh, at first, do I have to sleep with this guy in order to get this opportunity that I have to have? Or maybe nobody's looked at me or been interested in me in years, and this guy's showing interest. So he's a manipulator. Grant is a huge confidence man manipulator. And so a lot of time, I guess one of the ways that you see somebody getting buffeted in the wind, it's Vincent, because he's just being played with and he doesn't see that he's being played. He's not wise. He doesn't see in the same way that Micky does.
Yeah. And Micky just has to sort of back off and say, you know what? The both of you in this, I can see the train wreck coming for the other guy, and there's nothing I can do about it except keep out of the way.
Got to keep your shoes clean.
Yeah. Well, she got to basically keep her eyes on the prize. What's she there for? What she's trying to figure out, and it's not about him. He's not.
Well, she's come to the point where she's like, I can't save everybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a tough pill to swallow, but she's seasoned enough that she understands what's possible. I do have another question from our studio audience, and it's from Lori Janos. And she said, can you fill us in on why Micky's relationship with Cordelia ended so abruptly without any interaction in the last book?
That's hard to answer other than to say I write mysteries. I'm very much right in the mystery genre. And, as I've been talking about, mystery is I think the question for mystery is, how do you find justice? What is justice? How do you find it? How do you incorporate it into their lives? And I think a romance writer is asking a different question, and equally valid, and it's, how do you find intimacy? How do you find somebody you fall in love with? And how do you get over your fear of being vulnerable and all that sort of stuff? And those are also interesting questions, but they're not the questions I'm interested in and not the questions that I'm asking. My questions are about, okay, how does someone flawed like Micky, how does she find justice? How does she search for it? So the interaction with the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend or whatever is, okay, this just happened. And, there was the pause between the two books. And in the end of the one book, obviously the main character was very ill. And I had some I seriously considered killing him off. That was one of my immediate thoughts. And a lot of people said, "Oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that." And so I had some second thoughts, and it was really kind of hard to kill off totally a character who had been with the series for most of the time. And, because I'm writing noir. Detective noir, it's not one of those things. You can't bring them back as a vampire because I don't have there are no vampires in my books. There will be no Genesis of Spock returning because the New World, actually brought his body back. I can't do that. Dead's dead, gone. And so then it became, okay, well, this is the book I want to write. So if I don't kill her off, how do I write that book?
Mm-hmm.
And what would make sense in terms of what is actually going on? And I think that's probably the best answer I can give, is that I'm not writing a book about them. I'm writing a book about Micky, and again, that look for, something's gotten broken in the world. Someone got hurt, and she's going to be the person that's going to try and fix it. And how does she do that?
At first, I was startled. I have to admit, I was a little startled when I read. I was like, "Wait a second, she's there are not really groceries in the house. Where's she? She's all alone. What's going on here?" And it was because the last lines in Ill Will, where Cordelia didn't know if she could continue to go through cancer treatment because it was so taxing. And then she agrees to try. So there's that that emotional tug. And so I expected the book to pick up there again. And when it didn't, I was like, And then I was like, wait, you know what? In Micky's world, which is the imperfect world where bad things happen, or it's just, bad choices and worse choices. And I thought it actually made it a little more interesting because we got, I guess, is it wrong to say that she was so domesticated over the books with Cordelia? She was much kind of more civilized.
Perhaps.
And so I thought it was kind of, it was abrupt, yes, but I thought it was interesting to have her be uncivilized again, to have these kind of, should I sleep with this person, or, what do they want from me, or what am I going to do with my life, or, I'm interested in investigating this missing girl because I want to impress, this chick that I don't even know.
Well, and if you look at some of the other mystery writers, you look at, like I say, the big ones: Sarah Paretsky, Marcia Muller, Sue Grafton, Case Carpetta. None of them are in long-term happy domestic relationships.
No, they aren't.
I mean, we think about it; they're not. If they have somebody, usually he just disappears because it didn't work out, or he gets killed, or turns out to be a bad guy. They have to kill him, But and so that's because again, the story isn't about the domestic life, and again, it's not taking the romance focus; it's taking the violence and dark and the mean streets, the bad guys, the running around with guns and that sort of stuff.
There was this moment. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's this moment in one of your books that I thought was interesting because Micky got around, and they were at a party, and she was wearing this really slinky short outfit that was Torben's, I believe.
Yeah.
And she had, at some point, slept with everybody in the room except for one person. And she joked that it's like, do you want to get it over with here on the floor? So, like...
yeah.
So she's like, no.
No. Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the earlier books.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is, yes, there's... Micky has aged. I think she has matured as I have. I mean, particularly in the early books, she was a real asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was one of the things that actually made her interesting as a character. Is how do we change? How do we gain perspective on ourselves and look at our behavior and say, well, maybe that's not the way I want to be. And so it also made her a much more interesting character to write about because if you start out with goody goody two shoes, what do you do with them? You know,
Mm.
how do you, you can, make them have something really bad happen to them, but then it's external. And sometimes the more interesting things are what happens internally to a person. The famous, man versus nature, man versus man, man versus himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's getting to the how does, she's sometimes fighting against herself. And to me, that makes the books more interesting because it's not just Mickey solving something outside; it's Mickey also solving something inside herself.
One of the more interesting pairings was her and Joanne.
Yeah.
And it was almost like their partners are the goody goodies
Mm-hmm.
and have no concept for, like, the darkness and whatnot that they're
Yeah.
experiencing. And I think it was Mickey had discovered a body in the woods.
Yeah.
And it was just, it had haunted her. And then Joanne had a solution.
Well, yeah.
On the stump of a tree to, like, use sex as a way to blot out that
Mm-hmm.
gruesome image.
Yeah.
And then at another point, Joanne shows up at her apartment and she's in this place, and Mickey's like, do whatever you want, but you can break my arm, but don't do what you're doing. It's like they couldn't exactly be kind to each other, if it makes sense. They got each other. They were part of the darker side of life. They saw, the really gritty, awful, and sometimes evil things, and
Yeah.
things that Cordelia and Alex were, like, insulated from to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were, and they are both women who came from damaging backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's how do you overcome that kind of hurt, the hurt for you as a child? What do you do with it, and where does it go? Shakespeare said, "Past is prologue," and of course, as Faulkner said, "The past is never gone; it's never even past." Mm-hmm. And so the two of them, particularly this is one of the earlier books, is the clashing that they come together, which is both erotic but also scary. It's out of those sort of twined backgrounds. And so how do they deal with it? And the fact that they both seem to need someone who doesn't carry that kind of darkness to help them get through.
Yeah, there's another book that Yvonne Height has this series with a necromancer in it. And Shade, the necromancer, is in love with a character called Sunny. And, it doesn't work out, like the clash between light and dark. No matter how madly in love she was, they weren't good for each other. And then Sunny found this other character who was a cop who was dark. And the question was, why her and not me? Because, finding someone who can walk with somebody who walks in darkness is not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it really depends on how dark, and it depends on that person who's in the darkness, and what do they want to do about it? What choices are they willing and capable to make? Mm-hmm. It's how do you not give in to that darkness? And I think that's one of the central things that Mickey always wrestles with, is because she does carry some of that darkness with her, and she sees darkness out there, and it can be very tempting. It can be very tempting to do the wrong thing, or to do the easy thing, or to gratuitously be, but I mean, actually, this is how the show time starts. She ends up, some mugger comes up, and she decides to have a fight with him instead of doing what she should do. And she realizes that that's scary. And she's right. It should be scary. You shouldn't do that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so how do you pull away from those sort of edges? Or how do you use them in a way that actually do work for good? And that's, that's the struggle of, I think, the kind of dark people, is they're always on that edge. And how do they not fall in?
Yes.
And I think that, that's one of the things that's interesting to me about writing Mickey, is how does she not fall in? Or when she does fall in, how does she get back out?
Mm-hmm. No, and what makes certain darker characters interesting is that razor edge of, well, let's think of, in everyday life, we don't get to, if we're angry at somebody, we don't get to punch them.
No, we don't.
And when life deals you, like, one hard blow after the other, and we all have to be civilized and, not scream in people's faces and not lose our temper and not, cross the line from civilized into animal, even though we really want to at this. So reading about characters who walk the line and sometimes cross it. It can be satisfying because it's not something you would ever do. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that some people can. God, it would be really satisfying to do that, even though we can't.
Well, I think that's one of the real is why people are so attracted to the mystery genre. It's, you know, you're right. We can't punch the guy out who cut us off in traffic or go after shooting him. That just would be wrong. And sometimes we can't even know what the truth is. It's, you know, he said, she said, you know, who knows where the truth is. But in a book where we are have an author who's omniscient, you know, even if it's first-person character, I still know what's going on in all the other people's heads and stuff because I created them, you know, and that gives us that sense of where the truth is, where justice is, and the feeling that even if it's not found, it can be looked for. And to me, that's what the mystery is, that you know, Micky can do things that I can't do. You know, she's very good. You know, she has the advantage of called rewrite, and it means that she can think of that really witty comeback. You know, when it came to me like 3 days later, and when it's no good. You know, she can be that real smartass and get away with it you know, and I can control the consequences to her. You know, that if the guy pulls a gun, it's because I know that there's a way that she could probably get away from it. As real life doesn't give you that.
No,
you know,
it doesn't.
It's just too risky. You just don't know. And so that's, I think, one of the things that books do give us. It does give us a chance to see that justice can be found.
So I, you know, our interview is coming close to a close. So I have one final question from our studio audience.
Okay.
Roxanne Bowden, and is Micky Knight based on anyone or perhaps an alter ego?
No. I found real life to be very confusing and confining in terms of stealing people from it. You know, I guess say Micky Knight came out of the late 80s when I was reading all the other female private eyes that were just suddenly blossoming on the scene. It was really kind of a heady time. It was like, okay, no, women can be the hard ass. You know, she doesn't have to be Miss Marple. She can be she can be Philip Marlowe. And it was a really kind of exciting time. So again, it was my thought of, okay, what kind of woman would do this? What kind of lesbian would do this, and how would she do this? So, you know, I will occasionally steal things from life, but mainly it's just laziness more than anything else. It's like I need a small town. You know, in one of the books, I needed a small town over in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I happened to grow up in a small town over there, so I just basically used that one. You know, why create a whole new town when I have a memory of one? You know, I mean, not that I named it per se, but you know, it's almost like I pick and steal from various things, and I've never consciously said, "Oh, this person is, you know, that person." It saves the libel suits.
And those little disclaimers that any similarity between persons living or dead is merely
right,
coincidental.
Yes. And again, you know. I can't, other than my own head, I can't get into anyone else's head the way I get in Micky's head. So I can't know somebody that well to have actually based her on them.
So I have one final question for you before we close out. And what is in the future for Micky? I've
started on it in that you don't start on a book by standing in front of a computer and writing on it. You start working on a book by thinking about it and coming to terms with it. And obviously Micky's going to have, you know, it's, I don't want to talk a whole lot about it because I've done so little work on it. You know, it's still kind of forming in my mind, but I definitely have an idea for the next Micky Knight book. And hopefully I'll start working on that a little bit.
And folks, it's going to be a mystery until...
It's going to be a mystery, yep.
It's going to be... There's this movie called Shakespeare in Love. And whenever they were asking Shakespeare, when is this particular plot point going to happen? And he's like, I don't know. It's a mystery. Because he wasn't writing that play, you know.
Books, you find out what the book is when you write the book. That's part of the journey.
Yes, absolutely. I've had a fantastic time talking with you and listening to you, and I hope to have you on again. You've been wonderful.
Well, thank you. I've had a good time too. Yeah, next time you're in New Orleans, we'll go to Commander's.
Oh,
or
yeah.
The Parkway Bakery or something, some little po' boy shop.
Sounds delicious.